You're watching BCTV. We're all about Brantford. You're watching BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Brantford.
Order. It's Monday, August 17th. It's 5:30 p.m. We're on Zoom. Let's talk about the first issue, which is personnel. I'll give it over to you, Chief.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Our agenda tonight is the supernumerary status of Lieutenant Chris Harmuth and Detective Paul Parati. Both of these tenured officers have retired. Both of them have left the agency in good standing, and both have interest, and we have interest in retaining them as supernumerary officers. So I'd like to bring it before the commission tonight for their consideration.
All right. You want to just tell us a little bit about your recommendation there?
Like I said, both of them have left in good standing. Both of them very valuable senior members of the department. And we've looked at the supernumerary program, and we have a lot of uses for them. It's beneficial to both the town and to them. So I have zero reservations about these officers.
Can I ask somebody to make a motion to?
I'll make a motion, Rick. I'd like to make a motion that the chief be empowered to hire as supernumerary the recently retired Chris Harmuth, effective August 18th, and Paul Parati, effective August 27th.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, so now let's move to the next item, which is a request from the East Windsor PD regarding body cameras.
So, as you're aware, we went through the budget process, and with the assistance of IT, we've contracted with Axon as our cloud provider for our body cameras, as well as the actual physical equipment that interfaces with that. In light of that, and the reason why we did that is we needed a cloud storage solution, but we also needed new body cameras. Our current body cameras are aging, and when we do switch over, they won't connect with the cloud of the Axon product. So the East Windsor Police Department currently doesn't deploy any body-worn cameras. Through Captain Galdenzi, he's familiar with Chief Ed DeMarco in East Windsor. Through conversation, East Windsor would like, if possible, for us to donate our old body cams. They do have some current infrastructure that this can work with. It would give them a head start to at least trial and error and test them and see how they'd like to deploy them. So from our perspective, we don't have any further use of them once we switch over. And the depreciation on these items, I don't see that they're of no value to us, but for them, it's a good start for them. And for us, if they choose to use them, I think it's a good use of what life is left in some of them. Some of them aren't usable, some of them can be usable, and how long, who knows. But I think it's worthwhile. He submitted a letter that was in your packet. And if it's a favorable approval, we'll move this to the Board of Selectmen meeting on Wednesday for disposal of this no longer used equipment.
Can I ask you, Chief, what the implications of this are for us from a financial standpoint? Were we just throwing these away anyway? Was there any residual value that we could have gotten? Was there any trade-in value? And said, those kind of questions.
No, there's no trade-in value because it's two different vendors. These are WatchGuard products, and we went with Axon. Some of the batteries are at the end of life. Again, we're talking technology here, so technology changes within years. So some of these cameras are 5, 6 years old. Some of them are 2, 3 years old. So depending on our end, they would end up in a box. And I'd rather see if they want to try the program and see if they like it. They're going to have to go to body cameras now with the Police Accountability Act, but this will give them a head start. And I think the chief documented very well in his letter. We're very fortunate. Brantford was way ahead of the curve on this. We were one of the first. So this is our basically second, or I would almost consider our third iteration of a body camera. So not everyone was as progressive and as forward, and economic issues too play into it. So I think it's worthy, and if we can help another agency out that doesn't have the means or, wasn't as fortunate, then let's do it. But for us, I wouldn't even have a value, but we would not be deploying these come our jump date with the Axon.
Great. Can I have a motion to do that,
Yes.
please?
So I would like to make a motion to donate our outgoing WatchGuard body cameras to the East Windsor Police Department.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. The third item on the agenda is a general discussion of the police accountability bill. Chief?
Thank you. So part of the reason too, also with those items, but I'm sure you had saw it in the media and followed some of it, but the police accountability bill, I wanted to take the opportunity just to go over, highlight a few things and, share some concerns that we have, and also discuss some of the things that don't really impact us because we're already starting to do those. So this was a 71-page bill. And for those of you that didn't watch the testimony or the Senate vote, it was with some conflict. It wasn't, it was pushed through very quickly. It was an emergency session. It skipped some committees. So there's some ambiguity in some of this, but there's over 40 sections in the bill. And I'll go through them really quickly and highlight some of them, and some of them I'll pass by because either we're already meeting those standards or, it's not pertinent for discussion right now. But so some of the changes include certification and decertification of officers. And that's through our post-council, which is effectively known as the Police Academy, but they govern all the departments in the state of Connecticut. Within that, there is a drug testing component for officers who are getting recertified. So we're recertified every 3 years. So we're going to have to drug test officers in those intervals. And I'm calculating the cost now, but there's going to be a cost to us. We're probably looking at about $3,000 to $4,000 a year to make this happen because it's a rolling cycle. Some of the language in there to decertify an officer, I agree with. For those of you who remember some of the disciplinary proceedings, if post decertifies you, you cannot be a police officer anywhere in the state of Connecticut. However, there's some labor law and union challenges that'll come through as a result of this law, but those are yet to be known. So that's one part. Second part was behavioral assessments or a psychological evaluation. My personal opinion is I think this was well intended. I think it's a good thing, but I also think that it's going to set us back a little bit because it's going to put a stigma on getting help. Right now, we were working through that barrier to get officers to get to EAP, specifically with tragic events, to get them into some type of debriefing and employee assistance program. And over the years, we've made some good stride with that. This is going to be a mandatory evaluation that could have labor consequences. Again, there's some ambiguity here. It says it has to be conducted by a board certified psychiatrist and someone with PTSD experience. And to our best of our knowledge, there's only one person in the state that fits that criteria. So how do we get all the police officers through this? More to come with that. So that is also going to be about $500 a year for an assessment per officer in a rolling period. So there's a cost there. Implicit bias training, that's good. We're already doing that. Most PDs were already doing that. Crowd control management policy, how we handle crowds. For any agency that was at an accreditation level or seeking it, they would have this policy anyways. The training, again, is going to be a problem because there's not many available trainers. And quite frankly, across the region, there's not a lot of equipment. So this is something we're going to have to get up to speed. Some reporting requirements, which we do anyways in our annual report: use of force, pursuits, everything we do, we document. We're reporting those things anyway, so I don't have an issue with any of that. That's what best practices should be. Police badge, name, your badge and your name have to be displayed. They're working on some language with that as far as, for detectives and special investigation times, undercover work. So they're working that out, but that's not an issue. Body cameras and dashboard cameras for cars, not an issue for us. Like I said earlier, we were way ahead of the curve. All our marked vehicles, our frontline vehicles, have in-car camera systems in them, and all the officers have the body worn cameras. You will hear some people say, well, I don't agree with the vehicle in-car cameras. Well, I like them, and many reasons why. The office for an officer is the car. Sometimes they're in high-risk driving speeds, and my experience has been that they've been very valuable. So to have a backup along with the body camera, I don't have an issue with that. Big cost for municipality, doesn't have it, and for municipalities with very large fleets, a lot of money there. So that's about a $4 million project. It looks like the Office of Fiscal Management, I believe, or Office of Fiscal Analysis puts it at about $4 million for 52% that don't have it. On an operational side, changes to some of the federal laws or our search and seizure Fourth Amendment laws. If we stop a vehicle now, effective October 1st, for strictly a motor vehicle violation, they have a taillight out. We are not able to ask the operators for their identification, and we're not able, the passengers for their identification, and we're also not able to ask the operator for consent to search the vehicle. So we have exceptions to the search warrant on the Fourth Amendment. One of those is consent, and that is, do you mind if I search your car? And this will now be taken away from us, this option. Is it something that I think is earth-shattering, and it just is going to be a serious training issue because search and seizure is very complex. There's a lot of requirements, 7 exceptions, and you need to know where you are. So this is a training issue. There's going to be some money that we're going to have to set aside for training costs that we didn't see coming. But as I go through this bill, if there's something that we're going to kind of say is a big concern, that's not on my top 3 list. But again, we can't ask for consensual search. Now, if it's a criminal matter, we're stopping a vehicle because they're maybe tied to some criminal activity, then we do have that right. So it's limited to just a motor vehicle violation. There's some other ones that aren't really need to be highlighted right now, but this one is the one that I want all of you to keep your eye on out for, and that's the deadly use of force. As I said earlier, this bill was pushed through very quickly. There's a ton of complexities in what we do when it comes to search and seizure, when it comes to operational practices, when it comes to law and use of force cases. What they included in this bill, and this will go into law in April if it stands as it is, it included parts of de-escalation and deadly physical force. It included what they call the provocation doctrine, where instead of an officer, a reasonable officer, what would have a reasonable officer have done in that situation at that second? This will be viewed in a hindsight 2020 fashion of, well, if the officer tried to de-escalate, or did the officer stand over here? Did they use tactics, bad tactics that contributed to the use of force? Now, again, this is not, thank God, an everyday occurrence, but this is the most concerning part for any law enforcement officer for the safety of themselves or the people they're trying to protect. It's a very complex, and these things, and you've all heard me say this in many, many public meetings, when you have use of force cases like that, like this, a deadly use of force, these type of things do not play out in the movies where they're 30 seconds in duration. They're normally very quick, very up close, and to have an officer be judged by not a reasonable officer standard, but to have criteria put upon them is against all the federal Supreme Court cases that have been given. Some of the best attorneys in the state of Connecticut that are police attorneys and know about the deadly use of force and how complex, they're in talks right now to try to see if we can get some movement on this. Both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, have said that they're willing to look at this. But to me, on the number one part of this bill that is very concerning for police officers is the language which is in here. And I do hope that both sides will take a good look at this and they will listen to the experts in the business. How can I ask you to make a split-second decision and be judged in 2020 hindsight? Now, if you violated the law and it was an unnecessary, unjustified use of deadly force, okay, prosecute the officer. Hands down, I agree. And there's a mechanism and a process to do that now. But what this is going to do is it's going to put hesitation in officers. And when you put that hesitation in them, what can happen is not good. Now, some might say that it'll stop officers from being overly aggressive, or it might prevent some police-involved shootings. Looking back over about 25 years, I know of one that was a bad shoot that the cop was arrested, and ultimately I think he wasn't found guilty, if I'm not mistaken. So statistically speaking, yeah, do officers shoot people in the state of Connecticut on a yearly basis, 1 or 2 or 3 a year? Yeah, sometimes. But to legislate these conditions into the Connecticut state law is problematic. So we are hoping that we're going to get some cooperation. We are hoping that our voices will be heard and that maybe we can see some movement when they go back in session. You'll hear 30-second snippets on both sides of this issue, that it's great in this bill. Please dig deep and look at some of the facts and look at some of the case law, basically, or the jurisprudence behind all of this. So when I look at this, do I think this is going to hurt proactive policing? Yes. If this stays on the books in April, I do think you will see an impact on proactive policing. And that is just pure mitigation efforts. If you have the risk here to meet these criteria, which I can tell you, the studies will tell you, it's almost impossible for your brain to scan all the criteria that they are making us comply with. Why would you increase your probability of being in a deadly use of force case? So you'll go on your calls. We will protect the public. We'll protect the officers. We'll protect the citizens. But I think it'll have an impact on proactive policing. So that's the number one for me that I have concerns about for myself and for the people, the members of the Brantford PD. There's also a requirement to intervene in excessive use of force. That's been around for years. I don't know why all of a sudden, any good police agency had that in their policies. Under federal civil rights violations, if you didn't intervene, you were just as culpable as the person who was doing the act. And that was both criminally and civilly. But now we have a Connecticut state statute for that. And there's some language in there that could use some cleaning up, and hopefully that will be looked at also. Real quickly, the Office of the Inspector General, that's going to be a newly created arm of the state's attorney's office, which will investigate police use of force cases, deadly use of force cases, and incarceration deaths in our jail cells, which is pretty much already investigated by the state's attorney. But that's a new position with new investigators that is being created. Prohibition on using certain military equipment, we don't have any of that. We never, since I've been here, we don't have any surplus military gear. There are some carve-out exceptions for high water rescue vehicles and armored vehicles under certain situations. Some of it I can agree with, some of it I don't. I think there's some purpose-built armored vehicles for policing that are necessary. And the region does have that. We use those regionally, so I don't have much of an issue with that. And last but not least is let me hit on the accreditation first. By 2025, they want all police agencies to be CLIA accredited. We're already started that process. We were accredited back in 2008, and we picked the ball back up, as you know, recently, and we're doing it anyways. I think it really keeps you in tune with the policies and forces you to do internal inspections. Yeah, there's a cost, $10,000 a year plus some other ancillary costs, but I'll tell you what, we're a believer in it and we're already into it, so I don't have an issue with that. So last but not least is the qualified immunity piece. And I'm sure you heard this on the news also, and this is also a concerning part of the bill for me and for many other chiefs across the state. You'll hear it say that the officer has no more exposure than they did previously. This creates a venue in the state court now. It basically opens up the faucet for the water to start to run, and we're going to get some cases. And when we get some of these type of cases, specifically on the federal side also, it's a risk versus reward type of system where, we pay very expensive lawyers. And sometimes there's nuisance claims that we pay out, even though the officer says, listen, I didn't do anything wrong, and we don't believe they did anything wrong. There's still sometimes a payout because it'll cost us more to defend it than it would to give it a nuisance and make it go away. When an officer goes through a deposition, it's not pleasant. Whether you're in the right or the wrong, you're going to be painted in a certain light. Do I think this is going to have an impact on proactive policing? Yeah, I do. If you've been exposed to lawsuits in policing already, and myself as the chief, I'll be named in all these lawsuits, for training issues and hiring issues and supervision issues. Depositions aren't fun. So again, normal mitigation. I'll go on the calls, respond to the calls. We'll do what we need to do. But I think once officers get exposed to some of these lawsuits, whether, they're in the wrong, certainly if they're in the wrong, then there's going to be associated penalties and sanctions anyways. But they say, oh, well, they don't have to pay. They're still protected under qualified immunity on the state side. Well, they're going to have to create state law. They're going to have to create precedent. So who wants to take one for the team and be the first batter up? Well, we don't know. So they're working on that. We're hoping to get some clarity on the qualified immunity. When they did issue the report, like I said, the Office of Fiscal Analysis said they couldn't put a price tag on this because it's dependent on how many of these cases will come through. Well, the net or the filter has been removed, so these cases are going to come through on a state avenue. So, I know Kerma and some of the other insurance companies that insure the municipalities were doing studies on this to see what it would look like and how much it's going to cost. So that's it is concerning. And I think I've talked to some officers and they are worried if you had to go in front of a jury. It doesn't take much right now to see what's going on nationally. So, yeah, you'll be protected, but you go through the process. So this was something that was opened up. So I know that's a lot to digest, but again, on the proactive side, basically we have three types of activity throughout your shift. You have administrative duties, that's your reports, that's your discussions with the boss or your lunch time. So that's a block of your time. Specifically, if you make an arrest, you're pretty much writing reports for the rest of the night or the day. And then you have our response to calls. And that's where we're going to start looking at sending more cars, 2 cars, the mental health side of it, 2 cars there, 2 cars to domestics. So when you have proactive time, that's when you don't have administrative duties and you don't have calls for service, quote unquote downtime. That's when you engage in proactivities such as motor vehicle stops or looking for people who have warrants or trying to interrupt crimes in progress. Well, if we elongate the administrative side of it through more reporting and we add more cars because we're trying to, obviously we have some concerns, so the officers are going to want backup. Now we're shrinking that proactivity time. And on top of that, just the thought process, if I don't go engage that suspect or stop him and I just go to my next call, I limit my exposure. So I do think, do I think policing is going to come to a halt? Absolutely not. Policing will continue. We will do what we need to do. We've upped our motor vehicle activities since probably July in response to citizens' complaints. We're stopping speeders. We're stopping cars. The men and women are still going to do their jobs, but we're going to do it a little differently. So that's a lot to digest, and I just hope for those who are listening at home, I hope that our lawmakers have heard the voices of the Connecticut Chiefs of Police Association. I hope that they've heard the voices of some of the best attorneys who have the history and all the jurisprudence knowledge of search and seizure, deadly use of force, and how we do our job. And we want to work together. We want to make sure that there are some reforms. I agree. But let's do it in a smart fashion. These are highly complex issues that I think we're more deserving than one session of a 13-hour Skype or Zoom airing session and then one night of legislative talk. And I will end this with this, and I'll gladly take your questions. What I've heard from most of the officers, most concerning, is a lot of the officers watched the whole legislative process, watched it from the beginning to the end. When people got on the floor and said, there are parts of this bill that need work that aren't good, but we're going to vote for it anyways, that's where I think that, we need to look at ourselves and say, okay, I think we're better in this. And there was a lot of great comments shared that night. And I would encourage all of you to go to Connecticut Television Network to try to go back and watch it. Very, very what was said, how it was said for these complex issues. Complex issues on both sides, to protect the cops and to protect those that we serve and those that we have to arrest. And I think we deserved better. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had a quick, go ahead, Rick.
John, you want to say something?
Just a quick question. The burden or the cost of this extra training, does it just fall on municipalities, or will the state pitch in?
Now, as usual, anytime we see changes in the law or model policies or statewide policies, and the training requirements, there's no funding for that. So I'm going through this line by line and looking at it. I do anticipate some cost increases coming up, specifically with the psychological testing, the drug testing, and training that I didn't, just back to the use of force. This is a standard that's been around for decades and decades. How do we untrain a 20-year police officer? And I think some of the trainers and the policymakers were all trying to get their head around this, but no, there's no funding. That's on the municipalities.
Chief, when will you have a better grasp on what the financial total picture is? I'm not sure you heard me.
I think we'll go through April. I don't know if you can. Is he frozen?
Oh. I think he's frozen. I'm okay.
I think it's got to go through April when they decide on the rest of the vote.
Yeah, the nature of my question was, our budget season starts in the December timeframe, and I was afraid of the same thing, but we ought to have some kind of an idea so that even if it's just telling the Board of Finance and the selectmen, look, this can happen in April, and if it does, this is the financial consequence.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt everybody because I don't know what happened with the chief and why he's gone, but there is a problem right now with the hosting of the meeting. Because even though at the beginning of the meeting it says he's the host, it won't allow me to get out of the meeting to join my other meeting, which was scheduled for 6 o'clock, because it's still connecting me as the host apparently, even though, so there is a big mix up right now. So I don't know what happened to the chief and where he went.
Well, let me make a suggestion.
There he is.
Here he
He's
goes.
coming back in.
Yeah, all right, let him come back in.
Sorry, Trista, I don't know if that was me.
I don't know if it had something to do with me disconnecting first, John, but it will not allow me to leave this meeting and start my next meeting, which just was supposed to start 2 minutes ago. Because it is still having me as the host, even though at the beginning of the meeting it said you were the host.
We can probably adjourn.
Yep, just all I wanted to end with is, appreciate your time. If you have any questions, let me know. The men and women of the department appreciate the community support. It's been fantastic. And please, we appreciate it. It keeps them going during these times. And that's all I have.
Okay, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Thank you so much, you
All
guys.
right. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.